Good afternoon, folks. We're getting ready for dinner. We're going to share a breaded pork chop recipe with you tonight. We got home from town a little bit late, and we didn't get our pork chops out of the freezer till about 3 o'clock. And you can imagine at 63 degrees here in the house, they don't thaw out very quickly. So I'm going to share a little tip with you. So stick around. All right, a cool little tip. If you have an aluminum cookie sheet, this is my quarter sheet pan. I put my pork chops or whatever I want to thaw out if I need to do it in a hurry and don't have all day, like frozen chicken breasts or something like that, or steak. Throw it on your aluminum cookie sheet if you got one, because aluminum is a fantastic conductor of temperature, heat, cold, whatever it may be. And then I put it on my burner on my stove so there's plenty of air underneath it. Of course, we do not turn that burner on. We just want the airflow underneath. You could use a cooling rack or whatever you want to do. But I can already feel this cookie sheet is already super cold because it's drawing the heat out of those pork chops. And it'll thaw it pretty quickly. So we'll come back when we have those thawed, and we'll tell you exactly how long it took. Meanwhile, while we're waiting, we're going to take our apples that we canned this year from our big gigantic apple tree out by the garden, and we're going to make a quick little dessert for dinner. We have our 2 pints of apples. We used the juice and everything. We just dumped them right in our little square baking dish. And we're going with our standard cobbler recipe, 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of sugar. However, this time we use brown sugar and 1 egg. So we're going to mix all this up until it looks like coarse crumbs, and then we'll show you what's next. We're looking good here. So I just use a fork, and I just keep cutting this thing up and stirring it together. If you have a better method, by all means use it, but I've always just used a fork until it looks about like that. And then we're going to kick this up another little notch. Most people you would see put cinnamon in their mixture here. However, like our red hot apple pie recipe that we did, we're going to take about 1/8 of a cup of our red hot candies. This is a good substitution because it's hard to find red hot candies anymore, but these are just like them. And then we're going to scatter these over our apples in the dish as even as you can. And Kelly's not a big fan of cinnamon, but she's okay with this. This adds sort of a different flavor than just plain cinnamon. It's really good. It'll turn the inside a real nice, pretty pink color. So now we're going to put probably most of our topping on here. We may not use it all, but that's our next process. Just spreading it kind of evenly over the top. Now this flour mixture is going to help thicken all of that juice in those apples. But we don't want a big dry crust on top. We want the filling to kind of bubble up to the top of this stuff. So my guess is we've used about 3/4, and that's all I'm going to use. The rest of this I will probably discard. There's not much left in there. So now we're going to get some butter. And let me get something to grab that butter with. We will just use a butter knife. And we're going to put some butter on top of our mix here. Just some good little pats all on top here. Now that butter is going to melt into that mixture on the top and give us a nice crispy top on that cobbler crisp, whatever you want to call it. So we've got our oven heated to 350, and we're going to put this in the oven. It's going to take almost an hour to cook this, maybe even a little over, but we'll let you know when it comes out how long it took. Now, if you have an old gas oven like we have, and we love this old oven because it's a workhorse, you won't necessarily know when your oven comes up to heat. But with the propane oven, if you start hearing the propane cycling on and off, because you'll hear like a little poof when it comes back on, there you go right there. You know it's up to temperature if it's cycling on and off. So we're going to get this cobbler put in. Alright, there we go. So our pork chops are still thawing. So I think what we're going to do now is, after I clean up my dessert mess here, is we're going to start prepping our mashed potato squash. Now the reason we have some of the topping left over is normally we do like a 9x13 pan, and we did a 9x9, which is about 4 inches shorter on one side, because even though we use 2 pints of our apples, there's not quite 4 cups of actual fruit in those jars. We end up with about 3. So that's why I used a 9x9. If I was going to do a 9x13, I'd probably go ahead and put in another pint of apples, and then we would end up using this whole mix. And we would obviously put more butter on the top, probably 6 or 8 pats of butter on the top of that. Well, let's get our mashed potato squash cut open. It's pretty dry because it's been sitting in the root cellar. They dry up as they sit down there. And a little while after fall, you want to start going through your root cellar and kind of culling out the squash that had an issue. If you have a squash that had any kind of little opening or bug stuff going on, they're going to get mushy and start to rot. These, you can see, are really still nice and firm. So while I have this like this, I'm going to use our knife just to trim the skin off the outside of this squash, so you can see what we're doing. So I'm going to do the rest of this, and we'll come back and start cutting it up. We got both sides of our squash peeled. We just trimmed them off the outside. Now we're going to scoop out the center. Just going to scoop them into our little garbage bowl here. I'm actually going to save these seeds. See if we can grow these in our garden this year. So I'll put some of those there on the cutting board. The rest I'm going to put in the garbage bowl. Now, these garbage bowls are really handy if you get one. It's just a stainless steel bowl. I mean, you don't have to buy anything special. I never really liked Rachel Ray, but I did get this idea from her, is having a garbage bowl on the sink when you're doing prep. So you don't end up with it all over your counter. And when you're all done, you can take the whole thing to the garbage can and dump it out. And it's pretty handy. So I did pick one good thing up from Rachel Ray. Back in the day when I watched Food Network religiously when it first came out, I was hooked on the Food Network, as I think many people were. So we basically scrape that out pretty much just like a pumpkin. When you're carving pumpkins with your kids would love this process. So share it with them. Say, hey, we're going to carve mini pumpkins. Come help me in the kitchen. So I'm going to clean the rest of this out, and then we'll start cubing it up. Alright, got our squash cleaned out. So now we're going to chop it into pieces that we can put in the saucepan and get the simmering. Now I like to steam these, and the reason being, if you boil them, a lot of your goodness comes out in the water. So we're going to put them on to steam, and once they get tender, fork tender, maybe a little beyond fork tender, we're going to mash these babies up and put a little butter and salt and pepper with them. It'll be a nice dinner treat. And these squashes aren't very big, but it's just Kelly and I, so there's enough servings for us easily. And I'm cutting these in about 3/4 inch pieces. Try to make them even so they all cook evenly. Again, they're a little hard from drying out in the root cellar, but that's what winter squash do. And we got butternut squash down there, we got acorn squash, we've got a couple, probably 2 or 3 pumpkins, real nice pumpkins, and we have our mashed potato squash, and they all keep really well. They're a nice winter squash where the skin gets nice and hard and they preserve really nicely. And they'll last in the root cellar pretty much until it's planting time again in the garden. So we're going to get our little steamer rack to put in here and some water, and we'll put these on the steam because we're about an hour away from dinner. There's our seeds we're saving from our mashed potato squash. I always mark on the paper plate what they are, and then we'll put them down in the basement on the table till they dry out. And then we have little seed envelopes to put them into that we will also mark and keep them with all of our seeds in a plastic tub in the root cellar. Now I don't have to save these seeds because my cousin will grow these again. But every now and then we get hail damage out here in Nebraska. And it's not like a big blanket widespread hail damage. It's kind of spotty. So I'll probably grow some as kind of some insurance. In fact, they plant extra pumpkins like a half a mile away on their same place out there just for a little bit of insurance. So they have pumpkins because they've had hail damage before where it wiped out their whole pumpkin patch. But it's also a challenge to grow them too. We're going to see what we come out with. Sometimes you don't come out with the same plants. If it's a hybrid seed, we may not. Or if it cross-pollinated with something close by, it may not come out the same. And some people get afraid of like toxic squash, something like that. But all you got to do is taste it. If it's bitter, you don't want to eat it. But if it's still got kind of a sweet flavor, you're fine. You don't have to worry about that. All right, we got our mashed potato squash in simmering. And I checked on our pork chops, and they're already thawed enough to come apart. And they're thawed about 1/3 of the way through. So what I did is I flip them over to get a jump start on the other side. It's only been about 30 minutes since we put them on this tray. So it's pretty amazing how quick that goes. By the time it's ready to get dinner going in about another half hour or 45 minutes, those will be thawed out, ready to go. Now you can see we cut our chops fairly thick because I don't like a little thin chop that thaws out. But for the sake of breading these, and the breading's going to brown very quickly, once these thaw, I'm going to slice them long ways down the middle to make these about half as thick. And we'll end up with 6 thinner pork chops that will cook a lot better with the breading on them. If these weren't going to be breaded, I would not cut them in half. So we're putting together our classic breading station here. We start off with flour, egg, and then what we did here is we took some saltine crackers and we just crushed them in the sleeve that they come in to where they were fairly fine. And then we put them in our bowl there. That's going to be our final coat. I'm only using about 1/2 cup of flour. Normally I use a cup of flour and a full tablespoon of our favorite seasoning here. but because I'm only doing 3 pork chops, I didn't do a whole cup of flour. So I'm doing a half a tablespoon, which is a teaspoon and a half, into our flour. And I'm going to do the same thing in our egg. You don't want any bland layers. And then the crackers got lots of salt in them because they're saltine crackers. So we're not going to add any more salt. We may add just a little bit of pepper, but that would be about it. But season it to your taste. Use your favorite, whatever your favorite seasoning is. This is my go-to seasoning here. You've seen it before. All right, we are right at an hour into this. After we put the meat on this pan, they are completely thawed. And I've cut them in half. And I left some fat on mine because I enjoy a little pork fat on my pork chop. However, Kelly does not. So I did what I call a princess trim on these. Took every bit of fat off of them because that's the way she likes them. And my princess gets things the way she likes. Now this isn't going to go to waste. This little dog right here is already eyeballing that. She knows she's going to get a treat, huh, Brandy? Yeah. So we're going to do just a slight saute on Kelly's cutlets because she's not a fan of the breading. She watches her calories and intake and stuff like that. So we'll just do a quick saute on hers. But mine's going to get the full-on breaded pork chop treatment as promised. Now our mashed potato squash has boiled for probably 20 to 25 minutes and it's already fork tender. So I just turn the fire off and I'm going to leave it in the pot. I'm not going to drain our steaming water off yet because once dinner's ready I will drain those and then mash them so they stay warm. But we'll leave the oil out of this pan. We'll probably just spritz it with our olive oil spritzer just to give it a little bit of coating. We'll cook Kelly's first and then I'll add oil into the pan, just some plain old vegetable oil to do my style of pork chops. Now for our vegetables, since we're not in the middle of summer, we're going to use these steamable peas. I love these steamable pouches because these are flash frozen like the day they're picked. So at their peak of ripeness, they flash freeze these, and then all you got to do is throw them in the microwave for 6 minutes, and they're ready to go. And they literally taste like they're fresh out of the garden. And I'm not plugging these things. These people don't pay me for any advertisement or anything like that, and we don't do that stuff. But when these go on sale, I buy bunches of all the different kinds of vegetables. I have a freezer, a small refrigerator freezer. The freezer section is like full of these. I've got broccoli, cauliflower, peas, Brussels sprouts. We love Brussels sprouts, but I love these and I suggest you try these because they're amazing. And like I said, like fresh out of the garden. It's crazy good. One thing I failed to mention about our thawing method, if your meat has kind of a curved side and a flat side, put the flat side down so it contacts the pan as much as possible with the surface area of the flat side. And then as it thaws, you can turn it over and the other side will actually flatten out too. Or if you leave it long enough, you probably wouldn't even have to turn them over. But it's an amazing trick. Give it a try. We put our brandy treats in the pan just to get those out of the way. I put a little seasoning on them because Brandy doesn't like bland food either. So I put just a little bit of our favorite seasoning on there, not too much. Hopefully some of this fat will render down to where we won't have to add any more fat for cooking Kelly's pork chops, but you never know, we will see. So we've got about 20 minutes to dinner, so I'm going to go ahead and bread our pork chops. And we dip them in the flour first. And then we're going to go into the egg. And remember what I said about using one dry hand and one wet hand. So this is my dry hand. So we'll put our flour on there. This is going to be my wet hand. And the reason we're putting the flour on first is so we have good adhesion with our cracker crumbs, because this egg is going to moisten the flour on those pork chops. Use my wet hand to put it in there and then my dry hand to flour it up. See, that way I don't get those clubbed fingers going on. Our brandy treats are done. We turn those off in the pan. There's our timer for our cobbler. Give that a look. It's ready to come out, so let me pull that out. You can see it's nice and brown, and the filling is bubbling. That's what you want. That's as thick as it's going to get, just like when you're making sauce and gravy. As soon as it bubbles, your filling will be plenty thick. So let's get back to our breading. Alright, I got my last pork chop in the flour. We'll turn our other one over here to get it moistened on the other side. So now with my wet hand, I'm going to go into the cracker crumbs with this one that's thoroughly moistened. And then I'll use my dry hand to put some cracker crumbs on that. See, now I can grab it without getting my hand all wet. And we're going to keep flipping this over and mashing this down until we get as much as we can to stick to that. And I think we're there. And the reason I'm doing this early, shake off any excess, the moisture will go into those and that'll stick even better as it sits. So now we're going to throw this one in the egg. Now this one's ready to go in the cracker crumbs. Put some on top. Looks like we're going to have just enough for 3 pork chops. Smash it down in there good. And we got as much to stick as we can. We put those in our plate over here to rest a little bit. We turn that over. I got a little coating on my fingers. These are still pretty good though. I got my wet and my dry mixed up. It happens. Now if you were making gravy, you would use this flour right here for your gravy. Don't let that flour go to waste. But we're not making any gravy tonight. We don't need it. Might be good on those mashed potato squash though, but we're gonna skip it. Forgive me, Mom, for not making gravy with this extra flour and not using that extra cobbler topping for something I know you would have never thrown that away. Not in a million years. My mother is very frugal. She doesn't waste anything, doesn't get rid of anything, saves everything. But I think that whole generation did that because they lived through the Depression where nobody had anything at all. So that's what made them frugal. And look at that, we had the perfect amount of cracker crumbs. So those babies are ready to fry and they're beautiful. So we're going to clean up our mess and then I think we're ready to throw Kelly's pork chops on. We're going to fire up Kelly's pork chops. We'll throw them in the pan, season side down, and then we'll put a little dusting of seasoning on the top of those. Now because those are so thin, they just need to be flash cooked. They don't need much at all. And we definitely don't want to overcook our pork like all of our ancestors did. And the ones that are still around still do. Not very much seasoning on those because they're really thin. If you'll check the FDA guidelines, they have raised or actually lowered the internal temp of pork to nearly the same as beef. And I like my pork just a little bit pink on the inside. It's super flavorful and juicy and nice and tender. And Kelly likes it that way too. But some people, like my mom, would be freaked out if she cut into a piece of pork and it was still a little bit pink on the inside. But don't fret, you're not going to be harmed. There hasn't been a documented case of trichinosis in the United States in decades. So don't worry too much about it. Everything's raised a lot more sustainably now in cleaner environments, and you just don't get those worms and diseases that all your ancestors warned you about. And these will be beautiful little pork chops. Alright, can you see how our pork chops are done about halfway through? So we're going to check them. And if you weren't cooking these in a non-stick skillet, if you try to turn them too early, they stick. Once they're cooked enough on one side, they break loose. They free themselves. So let's turn these babies over. Oh, look at that. Just gorgeous little cutlets. Those are going to be so yummy. Kelly's going to love those. So we'll come back when those are coming off. I have a plate cleaned up. It's not the same ones we breaded in. It's fresh, clean plate. And then I got a piece of foil to wrap those up in so they stay nice and moist. You'll notice when you turn pork over, it'll kind of want to curl and cup up on one side. You can either slice partway through one edge of it, and that'll cause it to lay down, or you can use a little bacon press like I got to flatten them out so they get a nice even sear on the other side. Okay, looking pretty good. Let's look at the bottom. Beautiful. So I'm going to use a Gordon Ramsay term. These things literally only cook for about 1.5 minutes on each side. We're going to pull them out, put them in our little bowl over here. The carryover heat is going to continue these things cooking a little bit. And we'll tint those with some aluminum foil, but first, let's put some oil in our pan, because we're cooking with oil now, baby. So I'm going to wrap these babies up for Kelly. Alright, let's go in with our breaded pork chops now. Our oil's up to temperature. Lay that away from me. On this gas stove, we've been doing all of our cooking on medium, because high is too high. So we've got all of our breaded pork chops in the skillet now. We'll let those brown on one side nicely, then we'll flip those over, of course. So if you've ever experienced greasy fried foods, it's because your oil was not hot enough. You need your oil hot enough to where the moisture in that meat, as it boils out, expels the oil out of it, and it keeps it from soaking into the breading. So this is kind of the fry you want. If your skillet dies out a little bit and it's not frying actively like this, you need to turn the fire up. Also, if you're worried about your skillet not being hot enough, use an electric skillet. I often use electric skillets when I'm deep fat frying or something like that. And by deep fat, I mean like 1/2 inch of oil. But your electric skillets have a thermostat on them, and you want to run about 350 to 375 whenever you're frying something. And then it's a no-brainer. You don't have to guess. The skillet does all the work for you. Alright, we got a flip. Beautiful golden brown on the one side. You can see it's picked up some of the dark bits from grilling Kelly's pork chops, which is fine. That's your flavor. So the second side always cooks a little bit faster. So just keep checking the bottom. Give it about 1 minute and give it a look. The crackers and anything like panko breadcrumbs or anything like that, regular breadcrumbs, they brown fairly quickly. So remember, that's why we cut those pork chops thin. So they would be done about the same time as the breading browns. But you don't want to put breading on a real thick pork chop. If you do, you would cook it just like this, but then you would put them like on a rack and put them in the oven and finish them off in the oven, and just make sure you use a meat thermometer to make sure you're where you need to be. So these aren't going to be long at all. We'll have them off in our plate. I'm not going to cover these with foil because I don't want them to steam. I want them to stay nice and crunchy. Aren't those gorgeous? Gorgeous breaded pork chops, boneless. So you don't have to worry about bones either. So Kelly's just about home. So I'm not going to put the peas in until she's just about here because it takes her 5 or 6 minutes just to change clothes. So when she gets here, I will finish the mashed potato squash and I'll throw the peas in, and then we're going to have a pretty good supper and dessert. Look at that masterpiece. Beautiful. Well, Kelly has made it home safe. I've got a dish ready for my peas. I got some butter in there and some kosher salt for when those come out. Just give those a nice little flavor. Don't skip that step. And then our mashed potato squash. We've got some butter, salt and pepper, and some dry parsley in there. We're going to mash those up to where they're like mashed potatoes. Now remember to taste your food. We need a little bit more salt in our squash. So put a little more in there. Just like potatoes, it takes a little bit of salt to make these babies taste good. So let's give them a try. That is perfect. They are spot on. And our peas are done. Super hot peas. A little bit left in that bag. Randy, there's one down here on the floor right there. Get it. There you go. We're going to stir our peas up. Get that butter melted into them. If you've ever had bland vegetables, it's because you don't add any fat or salt to them. So you always want to add the fat and the salt. Make them taste yummy. So those will get all nice and coated with that buttery flavor. And you'll want to taste these too to make sure they have enough seasoning. You can add a little pepper if you want. A little seasoned salt, whatever you like. My grandma used to make peas and tomato sauce. Never liked them, but she made them a lot. May have been a Portuguese thing. There was other spices in there. I think there was just a hint of cinnamon and probably some salt and pepper. But did not care for them. Haven't tried them in my adult years, but let's give these peas a shot. Wonderful. Like fresh out of the garden. There we go. Dinner fit for a king and queen. And my queen is home. Hi, baby.
Hi, babe.
We also got pup treats. What do you think, Brandy? What do you think of that? Wow. So good, huh? All right, it's dinner time, so we're going to let you guys go. So, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. We love you here at Mark Kelly Farm. Come back and see us.